we're going to talk a little bit about Woolpert. I want to talk about culture, Neil. And culture is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I want to start by maybe just asking you, how you think about culture. How would you define it? What comes to mind when you hear the word culture, when you're talking about a company culture?
Yeah, it's really, number one, it's incredibly important to us. And, from our perspective, to be successful in the long run, we really need to foster an excellent culture here at the company, right? It has to be in balance with everything else that we're doing. So we put a high degree of emphasis on it. We're actually pleased to say we just got our 9th Great Place to Work certification here,
Wow,
which
congrats.
is something we do to really focus on culture. So that's, something like 85 out of 100 employees or so are saying this is not just a good place to work, it's a great place to work. That's a pretty nice thing to hear.
That's great. What if the real reason people stay or leave your civil engineering firm has nothing to do with paychecks and everything to do with purpose? In this episode, I'm joined by Neil Churman, President and CEO of Woolpert, to talk about what it really takes to build a workplace where people feel they get to go to work, not that they have to come to work. We'll discuss how culture shapes growth, the strategy behind scaling through acquisitions, and why civil engineers should design their careers with intention and strive to be well-rounded. Whether you're leading a team or aspiring to do so, this conversation will challenge the way you think about culture, growth, and leadership in today's AEC industry. Now, before we jump in, I do want to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event, designed for firm leaders who want to elevate project delivery, build strong teams, and scale with confidence. These events provide an avenue to connect with other project delivery leaders in the industry. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey, with more coming soon. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering CEO Show. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Today, we're lucky to have with us Neil Churman. Neil is the president and CEO of Woolpert. Neil, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Anthony, great to be here. Appreciate it. And looking forward to talking today.
Yeah, really excited to have you. And I guess the first thing I'll ask you just to kick us off is take us through your journey and how it led you to your current role as a president and CEO of Woolpert. A lot of our listeners are civil engineers. They aspire to be leaders. And obviously you're a leader for a great company. Just take us a little bit through your journey as a background.
Sure. Happy to do it. And it's definitely been maybe a little bit of a non-traditional path or a different path in the industry here, but one that, has been really rewarding on a bunch of fronts. And so coming all the way back, I'm a civil and environmental engineer by background. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, went through that program, and I came out and I worked for Michael Baker here in Pittsburgh. I did geotech work, construction management work, was involved in transportation projects and a lot of that, and really had a chance to get hands-on with some of the technical aspects of our industry early in my career. But I was also really interested in the business side of the business from an early on stage. And so really sort of proactively was looking for ways to get involved in that and, raise my hand for a few special projects types things while I was there. I had some great mentorship, in particular worked for an individual named Joe Beck. Joe and I are still close, and he was somebody who kind of brought me along and started to get me involved in some mergers and acquisitions, some finance type work, right, early in my career. So I got to see both the technical side of the business and then the business side of the business, but really, in a supporting role, right? Not yet a leading role, but a supporting role. And then from there, decided to do a little bit of a career. I won't say a pivot, but a little bit of a different way of working in the industry. And I went and did consulting work and M&A advisory work for about 10 years. I worked for Morrissey Goodale, which is a fairly well-known, advisory firm in our industry, and had the benefit of working with Mick and Mark. And then I went to another firm that's now part of Houlihan Lokey to do that. And so during that period of my career, I was advising all the companies, right, that we now partner with, or we now compete with, or team with, all the folks that are in this industry, pull up the ENR 500 list. Those were the kind of folks that I was getting to work with, right? And not just on the technical aspects of their business, but the business aspects of their business, right? Strategy, leadership, finance, M&A, those kind of topics. And then made sense for me to kind of come back in the industry, which I was excited to do. I really wanted to get back to a place where I'd have an opportunity to help build something, not just help other folks build something, right? That's really what consulting's about, but really, be able to get my hands onto what it is that we're building here. So I spent some time at TRC, worked with Chris Vinci, great CEO with Chris Vinci there at TRC. And then I came to work here at Woolpert for Scott Catron, who's now our executive chairman. And so coming in back into Woolpert and being able to bring some knowledge of how a project is run, knowledge of how technical work creates value for our clients and the importance of it, but also finance, strategy, HR, IT, legal, all of the areas that are kind of the backbone that help a business tick. Having some exposure to that along the way, is kind of how I found my way into this role, and now leading Woolpert with 3,000 plus people around the world. So it's been really rewarding, but it's also been you use the word journey. It has been a journey, right, in many respects, and and I think one that without that civil engineering foundation, it'd be pretty hard to be able to be leading our firm the way that we need to be. But on the other hand, it's the exposure to some other aspects, right, that start to open those doors.
Yeah, that's great. And I really think that your, exposure to the financial side of the business is so important. I mean, at EMI, we do a ton of like PM training and PM development work with companies. And it's like when you make that transition, even project managers, your first foray into leadership, let's say for a civil engineer, it's like a whole nother side of the business or the project, I should say, in that case, that you just don't know about, right? You know about the roadway and the cross sections and the drainage, but you don't know about the budget and the schedule and the scoping and the scope creep and all that stuff that goes into it. So I think what I really like about what you've described to us initially is it was very well-rounded, right? You got to see a lot of different things in your career. And to me, the best civil engineers that I've met in terms of how they've grown their career is being well-rounded.
100%. I'd agree with that fully, all the way back to, I think about sometimes like the most valuable classes I took as an undergraduate, right? Of course, structures and statics and mechanics and geotech and intro to environmental, right?
Flashbacks.
Yes, exactly. And so all of that, but like I took a law class, I took a psychology class, I took a history of architecture class, I took an art history class, like getting some exposure to some of these other areas, right? Economics, basic accounting, right? Things like this. You don't have to be an expert, but you get conversant and you get, kind of in that I know enough to be dangerous category. And then when you come over to your full-time career as an engineer, right? And the technical part, you've been trained on that, right? Through your education. But when you get to the project management piece, just starting to be conversant to some of the things you threw out, right? What is the budget? What is the scope? What is the schedule? What is my multiplier on the project? What's the utilization of my team? These classic KPIs that we look at here in the industry, being just conversant in that earlier is going to give you a leg up, because you're going to be in a position then where maybe you don't have to be a project manager, right, to be successful in this industry. That's an important point too that I should make, right? I mean, we have many folks here at Woolpert that are in significant technical leadership positions. We want to make sure we have that dual track, but they can speak the language too. And It's important in either side of it to at least be able to speak the language. You may not do it every day, but you are better positioned as a leader when you can communicate effectively and understand across the entirety of the business.
Yeah, and I think what you said about education too was really important. I had the opportunity once to interview retired General Joe Schrodel, who's a civil engineer, and he was responsible for a lot of big infrastructure projects in the Army. And he said something interesting. He's like, one of the best things I ever did in my whole career was take a class on contracts.
Yep.
Right. It's kind of like just what you said. You took a law class, right? And it's amazing just to think about how a class or two that you add on or an additional degree, and we could talk about that in a minute because I know you have your MBA, can just be a game changer for you in terms of how you can interact better with stakeholders on a project, right? Because you just have more knowledge that you're able to pull from. And so that is a question, Neil, that I get all the time about the MBA and how valuable it can be in civil engineering. And I know you have your MBA, so I was wondering if you could just reflect a little bit on, getting your MBA and, that process, what it was like, how it's helped you.
Yep. Yeah, it was definitely valuable for me. I did it comparatively early in my career. I went to Carnegie Mellon University to do my MBA here in Pittsburgh. I did it part-time while I was working, which was challenging in many ways because you're basically, 40 plus hours a week
Sure.
in the
Yeah.
office and then, probably another 40 plus hours a week, right, in class and projects and all that stuff. Pretty busy time, but at the same time, very rewarding. And I started that program when I was about a year out of undergrad. So what was good about that was I got immersed into some of these aspects of, as I said earlier, kind of the business side of the business in a little bit of a deeper way. The challenge at that point, though, was I was still early career, right? And so being able to apply some of those lessons wasn't as readily available, right? I wasn't in a position where, maybe we had a lesson on um, cash flow and managing cash flow, right? From a finance perspective. Well, I wasn't in a CFO seat or a financial, leadership seat at any sort. So it was kind of a concept and you kind of tuck it away and come back to it later. Um, but back to the thing on getting conversant, it allowed me to be conversant. And so I think what's really valuable, and for anybody that would be considering their MBA, think hard about the timing and do it when the time is right. And that's not just having some work experience that you can bring to the MBA program and then bring the lessons from the MBA program back to the job. That's a big value if you're going to do that. But also personally, right? Where are you in your life's journey, right? Family, kids, getting married, things that folks do, right, in the earlier stage of their career. All that stuff has to be in balance. So I think it's a great vehicle for folks that really want to aspire to be in a business leadership role in our industry. It's not for everybody, but it is for many. And I think doing it when the time is right and making sure you have that symbiotic relationship between your day-to-day job responsibilities and what you're learning in school is kind of the key to making that successful.
I think that's great. I think additional degrees, of course, can be very valuable in your career. I think Neil hit it on the head in terms of understanding the best time and approach for when you should do that. Everybody's different. And nothing against going for an advanced degree on a full time basis, but I also did a master's in civil engineering on a
Yep.
part time basis. And I have to say, the part time route was very valuable for a lot of
Yeah.
reasons, right? One of them being that my company at the time, thankfully, was supportive in terms of financially for the, which is nice when you're a young kid out of school and you don't really have any money. Secondly, I found that I wanted to get in right away and get experience, like get in projects, right? Because civil engineering is big, and you don't end up knowing what discipline in civil engineering you're going to end up,
Yep.
necessarily when you're out of school. And then also, another just benefit of it was that I had some professors that were working in the industry and teaching at night. I just felt like that was almost like a mentor, right? Because now you have someone that's in projects too, and then kind of teaching you some of these concepts. So again, everybody's different, but I think this whole idea of being well-rounded and educating yourself throughout your career is so important. I think like pick and choose what works best for you in your situation and when, but obviously it can really, like Neil's talking about here, is it gives you more access to more knowledge. So you can, kind of provide more value to your clients and your stakeholders, basically.
Yep. I'd agree with all that. And the one ad I'd put on there too is being, open for raising your hand. Be the one to say, I'm willing to help for that, right? I'm willing to take some of my extra time and get involved in something that's going to give you broad exposure. It may not be, it may kind of be, on your own time, right, or above and beyond your kind of billable hours that everyone needs to, do their part to drive projects forward. But it's that extra time to say, hey, I'm willing to stick around for a couple hours and work on this thing, or I'd like to be part of this task force or part of this project team that's kind of outside, and the answer won't always be yes. But I think that when folks are just showing their interest, right, in broadening their horizons, those are the folks that we tend to gravitate towards to find opportunities to put in front of them and bring them in and bring them along, right? And so we've a great tuition reimbursement program here too at Woolpert, and we really want to make sure that our folks that are saying, I want to go do my MBA, or I want to get my master's in a technical field, or I even just want to go to a course or a seminar or something like that. It's the folks that are raising their hand and asking for that stuff, right? Are the folks that are going to get, those programs, right? It doesn't work as well the other way. If I'm going to someone and saying, I really want you to go do your MBA, and they're like, hey, time out, I got two little kids at home. I have two little kids at home, so I know what that's like. It's it really needs to be a pull, not a push, right? And folks that want to have that broad exposure.
Yeah, I think that is so important. In fact, I was just working with a client that we did a PM program for, and they're trying to decide on like who the first cohort's going to be, let's say. And they're like, you know what, we're going to put it out there and we're going to see who wants to take the training course. Right. I mean, because those are the people that we want to invest in that are willing to say, hey, I'll put the time in to take the course and develop my PM skills or whatever the case may be. So I think that I look for that as a leader myself and people when I work with them, right? Like the engagement, the interest. I want to try this. I want to learn this. I mean, I tell the story a lot is when I was a young civil engineer, my company was like, I'm sorry, but we can't take you to planning board meetings at night because we don't have budget for it. And I told my wife, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go because I just want to watch. You know
That's
what I mean? Like,
exactly what I'm talking about. Yes.
like
I'm
I
raising
want
your
to
hand there.
watch and I want to see what they're doing and how they're presenting and how they're interacting with the client so that I get a little bit, I felt like for me, it was giving me a little bit of an edge.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great lesson for anybody early career. Like if so, if it's, hey, we don't have budget, it's a learning experience.
Right.
Go and just be in the room, be exposed to it and listen. Right. And that's a big thing too, right? It's just having a listening mindset and starting with having your ears open first is the place to start and just absorb so much from so many folks that have been there and have been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases in our industry. It's a lot to
Absolutely.
be learned from folks that are experienced.
Be a sponge. That's what I always say, right?
Yep.
Be a sponge when you're right out of school and just soak it all in.
Well put.
In the AEC industry, skilled project managers are the backbone of success. EMI's AEC PM certification offers tailored training, ongoing support, and exclusive access to premium content that keeps your team sharp and effective. From foundational training to advanced leadership tools, set your team apart with certified growth. Learn more at aecpm.com. That's aecpm.com. All right. The last question, Neil, I want to ask you around your career, and then we'll transition. I want to talk about Woolpert and the culture that you've built there. I want to talk about pressure for a minute because as civil engineers, we're doing calculations when we get out of school. We like what we're doing, reports, et cetera. And then all of a sudden someone says, all right, you're going to run a project now, right? Different level of responsibility, right? We're dealing with stakeholders. We have to communicate with people. It becomes challenging. Then you take a higher leadership position. Now you're running a department, right? Now you're responsible for the collections and, variances on projects and whatnot. And, all the way up to your case where you're now CEO of a company. And I'm just, this transition for civil engineers is so important from technical skill sets to people interaction to leadership. And I'm just wondering, like, based on your career so far, because you've obviously gone through different transitions throughout your career, I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about kind of, when you have these transitions and you have to deal with new skills, there could be pressure, it could be challenging, it could definitely be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you could talk through some of those transitions for you and how you've kind of navigated those.
I think, I think a couple of things, right? I think coming in to any new experience, right, or new skill set, perhaps that is, you're figuring out or you're trying to navigate and coming in, sort of one with humility. We as engineers tend to be, pretty smart people right across the board, but we also don't know everything, and sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Right. So I think it's important to come in with humility and with ears open and ask a lot of questions. I think it's okay to make a mistake. That's a reminder that a lot of folks need to hear in our industry. And that's coming from a place of support, right? It's not coming from a place of, we don't want to be in an environment where folks are unafraid to raise their hand and say, I'm not sure about this. I'm uncomfortable. I don't know what I'm doing, right? It's okay to do that. In fact, I highly encourage it with our teams, right? If you're feeling out of your comfort zone, there are a lot of people here to help you. But in order for that to work, you need to be willing to speak up, right? And speak up early, speak up soon. And we talk about that on projects. We talk about that in managing people, all the areas that can tend to be transitional for folks. I think for me, you said it well with being sponge-like, a lot of it early career for me was trying to just watch and observe and see how folks that I really respected and appreciated in the industry are doing it, right? How they're carrying themselves, how they're communicating. I've been the beneficiary of working for some great communicators, including Scott Catron, who was my predecessor in this role and who's our chairman now at Woolpert. The importance of communicating and doing it in a balanced fashion. We can't just talk about financials all the time. We can't just talk about projects all the time. And we can't just talk about culture all the time. We got to talk about all three all the time, right? And really being balanced across the way that we're communicating. And I learned that from being around Scott, right? Not, not reading a book or, trying to supplement it in some other way. I mean, those are certainly valuable, but it's the watch and learn aspect of this that I think is important. And like I said earlier, coming in with humility and knowing that everyone, myself included, right? And, the CEOs of the largest firms in our industry, continuously learning all the time. This industry is changing. It's evolving rapidly. Our firm, I'm sitting here in our Pittsburgh office. We've got a team of folks here that are doing AI development for geospatial projects that we work on. And I will be the first to admit there's many days I come into this office and I look on the whiteboard and I'm pretty sure it looks like a foreign language, but it's actually just them writing, code around AI, right? It's new for me. It's something I don't understand. So I need to respect that there's things I don't know too, and I need to be willing and open to learn along the way. I think that is how you get through those transition periods, right? And then do the work,
Sure.
to build the skill. And that can take the form of a course, a book, mentorship, all the things that can work, but you need to put the work into it. Doesn't just happen.
That's great. So good stuff there. We're going to make a transition here a little bit, but just to wrap up what we talked about so far, because I think there were some really good takeaways there. The first one being, I think as a civil engineer, you want to be well-rounded in different aspects of your career, technical skills, people skills, project management, finance. You just got to keep learning and build up those skills. That's a big takeaway. Another one is, Neil said it. I think every person that I interview on this show says it. You got to have mentors in your career, right? People that have been there before, that have done it. You want to shadow them. You want to learn from them. That's going to help you grow, navigate some of those challenging transitions in your career. I mean, we all have them. We have them in life. We have them in our career. It's just, it's just part of the deal here as we grow as leaders. And then the last thing that I think is also important just to note a little bit is that, when you make these transitions, if you go through your career and you're never uncomfortable, you're probably doing something wrong, or you're not growing, or you're not pushing yourself enough. So, when we say, you're going to be uncomfortable, it's really a good thing because, Neil just said himself, he's looking at a whiteboard. He didn't even know what was going on in that situation because that's not anything he's been exposed to before. So, when you have a new situation, it's uncomfortable. I always tell people, I like to use this. I have 3 kids and I was telling them this at dinner the other night, which they weren't thrilled about, but when you start your career, you have I call it the confidence jar. It's empty. You have no confidence because you haven't done anything, right? And like every time you do something, you go to a client call, you get up in front of one, you're filling up the jar just a little bit. And then, if you can keep pushing yourself, everything gets a little bit easier and then something else will come along that's new. So,
Yep.
just a couple of takeaways kind of from Neil's journey that we've talked about so far that I think can be really valuable for you as civil engineers as you grow and you transition into project managers and leaders kind of in your organization and also in the community. Because civil engineers, we're in the community. We help build communities. So we have to be leaders beyond just the walls of our own company. And that's really important. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about Woolpert. I want to talk about culture, Neil. And culture is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I want to start by maybe just asking you, how you think about culture. How would you define it? What comes to mind when you hear the word culture, when you're talking about a company culture?
Yeah, it's really number one, it's incredibly important to us. And from our perspective, to be successful in the long run, we really need to foster an excellent culture here at the company, right? It has to be in balance with everything else that we're doing. So we put a high degree of emphasis on it. We actually pleased to say we just got our 9th Great Place to Work certification here,
Wow.
which is
Congrats.
something we do to really focus on culture. So that's, something like 85 out of 100 employees or so are saying this is not just a good place to work, it's a great place to work. That's a pretty nice thing to hear.
That's great.
So that's positive. But when I think about culture, right, and I talk about this with our teams too, we've grown from largely a US regional business to now 3,000 or so employees on 5 continents. And we've done that over the last 10 years. So you can think about how much change is brought when you're now in a new country that has different cultures within that country to begin with, right? And then different cultures within that company in that country, right? That's now part of
Right.
Woolpert. So there's a lot of complexity to navigate there. And I think what I talk about with our teams is really a common thread of culture across the company. We don't have to all be the same everywhere. And in fact, it's the opposite. We celebrate some of those differences that we have around the world. We have some running jokes about football and all the different flavors of it, right? American football, Australian rules football, soccer, right? So on and
Yeah.
so forth, right? But but the shared thing is, everyone has interest in sports and their local thing, and it gives something for folks to talk about. But on a more serious note, that common thread of our core values, and we've got 6 core values: supportive, focused, progressive, industry leading, high performing, and balanced. And there's a reason supportive is listed first, and there's a reason balance is listed last, right? Is that reminder to make sure we're balanced across all of them. But if we lead with support around the company, right? And that's really treating people with kindness, being here to celebrate and prop each other up, help each other out. That's really what that's about. It's here to pitch in when your teammates need them. If we do that, we're going to continue to build the kind of culture that helps our teams really exceed their own expectations, right? Whether that's for themselves and their careers, for the project, for the client, whatever it is, we want to be in a position where we're helping each other do better than we thought we could. So in creating that environment and creating that culture, we can't just say this stuff. We have to do it and facilitate it and find ways for people to connect, and find ways for people to share in success together. But we have different programs and different sort of forums and venues within the company that we're trying to create that connective tissue and keep reminding people, hey, there's an expectation that this is the way that we're going to work together, right? So lead with support. And I say that every one of our global town halls, we talk about this, right? It's incredibly important. So it's a complex thing, right? And it's very hard to just say culture is this, but I think the common thread is the culture is the way we treat each other, right? And it's the way we take care of each other and support each other, as a team, right, across the company. At the end of the day, what is a company? It's a team. It's a team of people coming together to do something they couldn't do individually. That's really what this is all about.
Yeah, and I know that Woolpert is very focused on creating a culture where people like really want to come to work every day, right? And it's not this feeling of I have to come to work. It's more of I want to go to work. And it sounds to me like the way you do that is kind of exactly what you suggest, which is, building up the relationships with your team members and creating that community, almost like a family community where, yeah, I want to come to work because I really like working with these people.
Yeah, we talk about, I get to around here, right? Not I
Right.
have to. I have to come in today and I have to work on this bridge project. It's like, no, I get to come in and I'm working on this major bridge program that I think is really cool, right? Or I'm working on this data center project that's going to be the largest of its kind, or I'm working on this really unique project in this scenic location. And we've got a lot of examples of this across the company. And I think what really gets people motivated is meaningful work, right? They want, and that is something that, as a civil engineer, that gravitated me towards the industry, or early before I picked a major, back in my university days, right? Is the stuff we do is important as an industry. Like, it's fundamental, it's necessary for everything that we do as a society. And I talk a lot with our teams about this, that everything that we do here matters, and everyone has a contribution or a role to play to that meaningful work, right? So if we can provide meaningful work for our teams and things that get them excited, then they get to come to work. They don't have to come to work, right? And if they like the people they work with, they get to come to work and spend time with these quality people, right? And they get to build a career on the backs of, these great people they work with and these great projects that they're working on. And that's really the environment that we want to foster here, not have us in a situation where, frankly, we have folks who are having to work on stuff they don't want to work on, right? And we want them to be inspired, by what they're doing. Not every project goes perfect, just like every other company. Sometimes there's all right, hey, we got to go burn a little midnight oil here and
Right.
rework something. I'm sure you've been there too, right? I mean, it happens. But, on the whole, though, when you zoom it out, I want folks who are going home at the end of the day and reminding themselves that the stuff they do really matters, and they have every reason to be excited about it. It's big stuff for the country, the world, society, the economy, all of it. Like, our industry makes it all tick. And I think, folks, civil engineers don't get as much love as they should out there in the
That's for sure.
world, for the importance of the work that we do.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the built-in benefits of being a civil engineer is you can really see the impact you're having globally because you can see your projects being built and you're saving lives by less accidents, and you're creating clean water for people, and I can go on and on with all the different benefits
Yep.
that we put into realization. So just keeping along the same riff here, but throwing a little bit of a curveball in terms of mergers and acquisitions, right? This is big in our industry right now. You worked in M&A previously. You told us earlier, which is great. That gives you obviously a lot of insights to it from that perspective. But I want to continue this conversation about, right, culture. Like when you bring in a new company to your company, let's say, there's lots of things you have to think about in terms of integration. We deal with it a lot at EMI because we do a lot of PM development and PM training work for companies. So now you're bringing these people that come in and manage projects a different way. They use a different system, right? And you got to integrate it that way. But also you have to think about it from what we just talked about in terms of culture and the team and the people.
Yep.
So I know this could be a whole separate episode, but just to kind of get into it a little bit here, when you think about M&A and you want to bring in another company that's been successful in its own right into your successful company, what are some of the key things you need to think about for that integration?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one we definitely could talk for a while on this one. But, I think it starts with this, right? And I often talk about this with the CEOs or the principals of the other firms that have joined us. And we've had 17 companies join us over the last 6 or 7 years, which might sound like a lot, but relative to the industry, it's pretty balanced. Um, but it's really has to start with the right situation, and the strategy, the business strategy has to make sense. The cultures have to make sense, and the situation has to be right. Meaning, we need to be putting together two companies that can do more together than they could separately. If that's not true, it just doesn't make sense, right? So you start there. Then when you start to unpack culture, what we like to do is first we want to seek to understand. We want to come in and just understand what are those things from a cultural standpoint that make the company that we're talking to or the company that's joining us, what makes it unique? What are the things that you do? And ultimately, I think what we find is because we start with that situation is right and there's relationship building early, we're usually speaking the same language. We might just be describing the thing in slightly different words, and really trying to get our heads around what is it that this firm, how do they talk about culture? How do they communicate it to their teams? And then let's align that with the way we talk about that and translate, right? And make sure that we are speaking the same language. I'll give you a real example. So we just brought on a really great company here in my home state of Pennsylvania called Dawood. And we have six core values, and they had 24 fundamental habits was one of the ways they talked about their culture. And we started taking the 24 fundamental habits and like aligning them with the 6 values that we have, right? And they all kind of lined up in a bucket, right? That made sense. And so the concept is the same. The way we talk about it tends to be different, right? So that's kind of a first foundational thing. And I think the second thing on seeking to understand is sometimes the things that are the common thread that stitch together that company or that office that's special to them, they might not feel like big things to an outsider, but they're big things to that company.
Right.
We have another real example. We have a really great company that joined us last year called Bermeo Ahamil and Partners. They're down in Miami, Florida, and they're a top designer of port and maritime facilities all over the world. Like if you've gone on a cruise, chances are pretty good you've gone through one of their designs, right? Just an amazing company. And you go down to Miami and it's Miami, right? So there's Cuban coffee. That's part of the culture. And they have someone in the office that makes the Cuban coffee and goes around and gives Cuban. By the way, if you ever have Cuban coffee, just have one. One's plenty. It's pretty loaded on caffeine. But, going down there, if we were to come down and say, hey, sorry, guys, here's a Keurig. The rest of the company gets K-Cups. This is what you get. We're going to damage the culture, right? And it's part of the common thread of what pulls them together. So, these sound like, they're small examples, but they're real examples. And I think from our perspective, what we want to do is understand first. And then 2, we want to find the place of coming together, right? As a team. And when we can find that place of coming together is when we're ultimately successful, right? You might talk about it with this word and we might use a different word, but we're really saying the same thing, right?
Exactly.
That's where we need to focus and not let it get lost in the sauce of legal, financial, IT,
Right.
HR, all the other things that, yeah, they got to come together, but that's the hard wiring of the acquisition. The art is in the strategy and the culture.
That's great. And I'm glad you mentioned Dawood, because Boney Dawood's going to be a guest on the show coming up soon here in one of the next couple episodes. So we'll get to talk to him a little bit about his experience. So that will be interesting. But I love that. I mean, and really a quick analogy that I would think about that is when you hire someone into your company, an individual, you obviously want them to be their values to kind of line up with the company values, right? So when you're integrating a company or when you're acquiring a company, I would think it's kind of along similar lines, like Neil was saying. Like, you're not going to want to acquire a company that has a completely different value system than your company. It's obviously not going to work out, but that's easier said than done. Like Neil's saying, you got to strip it down, because like you have to really look at your values hard, look at theirs, look what they stand for, and go through a process. So it's really interesting to hear that. So Neil, I know we covered a lot. I'll ask you one last question as we wrap up here. Just going forward, we have a lot of civil engineers listening. If you could give maybe one piece of kind of leadership development advice from your whole career, your whole journey as a leader in the civil engineering industry, what would you leave them with in terms of developing their leadership skills?
Yeah, we already kind of talked about it, but I'll come back to it and put an emphasis on it, which is be comfortable being uncomfortable. Be willing to get outside your comfort zone and broaden your horizons, right? And I know we have a lot of folks who they do what they do because they love what they do, right? I love designing bridges. I love making sure there's clean water to drink. And we absolutely need that and celebrate that. But at the same time, if project management's not your thing, that's okay. But I'd also encourage you to don't close the door on it, right? Learn a little bit, speak the language, get conversant. If finance is not your thing, learn a little bit about it, right? Because if nothing else, it's going to make you a more effective teammate with everybody else that you work with, right? You're going to be able to speak their language. So this is really about exposure and, getting a little bit out of your comfort zone and learning about something that maybe isn't right down the middle of the fairway for you is only going to pay dividends as you advance in your career, whatever shape that takes, whether it's technical or otherwise. So well-rounded, breadth, we've used some of these words throughout this conversation, right? I mean, I really would highly encourage folks to do that and think about the ways that you can, broaden your horizons, right? Beyond whatever it is you're doing today. Keep pushing yourself to get a little uncomfortable. And when you do that, you're going to learn something in the process, right? And maybe you learn what you don't want to do. And that's just as valuable as what you do want to do. And I can say, early career for me, before I graduated, I did 4 different internships at 4 different companies, 4 different aspects of civil engineering. I did some environmental work, did some geotech, I did some construction management, I did some transportation. And part of that was like, I just wanted to see what it was like. And some of it I said, maybe that's not for me. That's not the zone I want to land in. But now right? So I think getting that breadth of exposure is key. And I think that's something as engineers we're maybe not naturally wired to do. So I think being conscious of it is something that I'd encourage folks to do, and it will go a long way.
Great stuff. Once again, he is Neil Churman, President and CEO of Woolpert. Neil, you're very busy. We're so grateful you spent some time with us to give back to the community and share some of your leadership journey with us. It was super valuable, and it's exciting to hear about what Woolpert's doing in terms of culture and growth, and we wish you all the best, and we hope we can get you back on the podcast in the future.
Anthony, really appreciate it and appreciate everything you're doing for the industry as well. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Neil. Take care. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Neil. He was awesome. He's very well-rounded himself, and I really appreciated the advice that he shared. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineering professionals become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.